Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi everybody and welcome back to the show. It's episode number 57 and we've got a terrific story for you today. Several months ago I was made aware of an extraordinary thru-hike attempt. I read that a young couple, Derrick and Bekah Quirin, had started an attempt on a thru-hike of the Appalachian Trail. Now, that wouldn't normally be particularly noteworthy. However, this attempt was a little different from the norm. Derrick and Bekah were bringing a companion with them. As it turns out, a very little companion. They were taking their daughter, Ellie, a somewhat inexperienced hiker who was just 12 months old. My first reaction was, of course, bloody crazy, I thought. That ain't going to happen. And having found their blog, Ellie on the AT, and committing myself to follow it for the few weeks that it was likely to be up, I kept an eye out for their likely ending. Several weeks later, I noticed that there hadn't been a post for about a month, so I assumed they were off the trail. Still, a couple of weeks was a pretty good effort, I thought. So you can just imagine my surprise a couple of weeks ago when I saw that not only had they not quit, they had actually finished. I was astonished and determined to get an interview with them. As you'll hear in a minute, this turned out to be a delightful couple of parents who went into this adventure with their beautiful daughter with their eyes wide open and fully prepared. I'm often wrong, but I've rarely been wronger, if that is a word. I don't think it is. Derrick and Bekah will be on in a moment. We've got another dock spot this week, and a word of warning for those of you with queasy stomachs, because that's what this episode is all about, queasy stomachs. Lynn Savino is going to treat us to a wonderfully clinical discussion on WAD, or Wilderness Acquired Diarrhea. I bet you'll be looking forward to that. And we're near the end of my journey in my book chapter at the end. Talking of books, by the way, I'll also be announcing the winner of Jeff Alt's book, A Walk for Sunshine, a little later on. So, a lovely show to look forward to, with Derrick and Bekah Quirin first up, though the real star was snoozing quietly in a crib. Here are Derrick and Bekah. Right, now we've got on a couple right now who had every single parent worried this summer by taking their 1-year-old baby on the Appalachian Trail. Even more amazing, they finished recently. So, hi to Derrick and Bekah Quirin. Is it Quirin? I couldn't work it out. Hi, how are you anyway?
Doing well. Yeah, how are you doing?
I'm not too bad, thank you. The first of all, of course, fantastic effort finishing the trail, and you only finished recently, didn't you? Was it the 15th?
Thank you. Yes, it was the end of September, so on the 30th.
Sorry, 30th. Wow, this really is recent. So
yeah, week and a half.
Oh wow, how are you feeling?
Oh, we feel good now that our bodies are starting to recover a little bit.
It is very debilitating, isn't it? I lost all the feeling in all my toes for about 6 months, and I lost all my toenails as well.
Then I feel very fortunate. So I still have all my toes and toenails.
Now, probably more importantly, how is Ellie? How is she now she's back?
Oh, she's good, but she's having a hard time staying entertained, not out playing with dirt and rocks and sticks 24/7. She doesn't really know what to do with the toys.
Yeah, she's sort of having withdrawals.
That's interesting. Yeah. So, did you take toys with you on the trail, or did you just let her entertain herself, or entertain yourselves?
Yeah, we didn't take a single toy with us. She just had nature to play with and us to interact with.
I didn't think about that before, because we did speak obviously before, and I hadn't really realised that. A child these days is surrounded by toys, but her toys were what she found in nature. Did she start eating dirt like I did as a kid?
Oh, yeah. We say it gave her a really strong immune system.
I would think so. And did you, as far as you're concerned, did she enjoy the experience?
Yeah, I mean, as much as, if not more than a child enjoys life at home, I would say she loved aspects of the trail. I mean, she would ask every time we would stop. she would say, pole, pole, and we would have to make our trekking poles as small as they would go, and she would run around wherever we'd stop trudging around with our trekking poles.
I saw a picture of that. That was funny. I must say,
she
that was
loved
cute.
that. She loved interacting with the other thru hikers. She loved the views. It was really cool to see what she actually enjoyed, and she definitely enjoyed a lot of it.
I meant to ask that. How did the other hikers you met on the trail, how did they react to her? And what did they think of you taking her on the trail?
The other hikers, I mean, they just found her a joy to meet on the trail. The trail community is fairly small, and so when word got out about us getting on the trail, we found that a lot of hikers we would run into had been looking forward to meeting her, and so they would see her and just say, "Oh my goodness, it's Ellie. We've been looking forward to meeting you." And we'd stop and chat, and they would play a little game of peekaboo with her on the trails. We'd stop, and then as we continued along, we just had so much support from the other hikers on the trail. They really enjoyed meeting her and spending time with her. And then even in the evening, sometimes the next morning, we would wake up and they would say, camping near you guys, I was a little nervous. I wasn't going to sleep because I thought she might be crying or screaming all night long, but I didn't hear a peep out of her. And so I think a lot of people, even if they were a little hesitant, they were pleasantly surprised to see how well she was doing and that she wasn't going to be a nuisance on the trail.
Yeah. And she slept quite well in your tent?
Oh, she slept great. We had one night where she cried, and we were camping near nobody, so she could have cried as loud as she wanted. Nobody would have heard her.
Oh, that's awesome. That really is. I must admit, I thought about that as well. When a child cries, it just tears at your heart anyway, doesn't it? Even if it's not your own child. So, I would have worried about that if I was camping nearby as well.
Oh, yeah, it's definitely reasonable.
So before you went away, when you were thinking about this hike in the first place, did you entertain doubts about taking her with you? I mean, obviously, once you've had a baby, you're either going to take her with you or you're not going to go at all. So were there doubts about the mere fact you were taking a 12-month-old on the trail?
I think once we had the idea and we explored it a little bit, we had been doing enough with her already that we felt like it was definitely possible, but we kept ourselves fairly flexible on committing to hiking the whole trail. Now, we did end up doing it, but we weren't opposed to backing out if we ever got to something that we were uncomfortable with, or we really, really tried, because we were going southbound, to get data from the northbounders about what was coming up for us.
All right.
Just so that we were aware and knew what we were getting ourselves into. But also, I mean, we had done some preliminary trips with her to try and, how sort of people do shakedown hikes. Well, we sort of did that with Ellie, and we got a feel for what it was like. We backpacked for almost a week in the Smokies just to figure things out and see how she would do and see if it was even possible. And between that and a lot of day hikes and a lot of experience of our own beforehand, we really felt like it was something that we could do. And so that, combined with our flexibility, we were pretty comfortable going into it, I would say.
Wow. Well, I think that's interesting. You went out there you kind of had the intention of doing a through hike, didn't you? But if you didn't, it didn't matter. Is that how you felt about it?
Yeah, I mean, definitely her safety and our safety and all of our well-being is much more important than doing a full through hike. I mean, I definitely, when I was a teenager and wanted to through hike, I wanted to be a purist and I wanted to see every white blaze, and I wanted to do a no-bow through hike like everybody did.
Sure.
But, we just had to be flexible about that. And we did end up seeing every white blaze. We were able to do the whole thing, which we were happy about. But again, setting out, that wasn't the intention or the preliminary or prevailing goal.
That's got to be the right way to look at it as well. I totally get that part of it as well. So you, obviously the important thing was looking out for Ellie and make sure she was okay. And did people like family or friends try to talk you out of it or not? Were they quite happy because they knew how you could handle the situation? No
one tried to talk us out of it that we knew. There were plenty of naysayers on the internet, like there always are, but our families were very supportive, and because of our experience and our background, and because they knew Ellie and they knew us, they were very supportive of us giving it a go.
Well, given that, your background, tell us about that a bit, because, that would have been my biggest worry, taking, and carrying Ellie, and particularly for somebody like me who fell so many times, I would have really, really worried about harming her, obviously. So tell us about some of your previous outdoors experience and why you felt so confident carrying this amazing burden, really.
Yeah. So we have recreational backpacking experience from the time that we were teenagers. So not tremendously early or a tremendously young age, but from the time we were in our 15, 16 years old, we were both backpacking, me with somewhat regularity. And backpacking was sort of a gateway into other things. I started mountain biking. I really got into rock climbing. And then all of this fueled our desire to pursue the outdoor industry as a career. And so we both studied outdoor leadership and experiential education. We've guided mountaineering trips and backpacking trips in Washington State and in the Cascades and at Rainier and Olympic National Park. And so we have a fair amount of experience. We've got a lot of backpacking experience. And again, like I said, we did these preliminary trips with Ellie just to see, okay, on somewhat difficult terrain, how do we handle having a baby on our back? And,
sure.
We were just very careful. We didn't rush. The only time that I slipped was on coming down Moxie Bald in Maine. It was a wet, rainy day, like almost every other day in Maine. And my feet just went out from under me, and I was able to catch myself with my hands. And I really don't know that Ellie or her backpack ever hit the ground. I know my butt did and my hands did, but I don't think she ever did. It certainly wasn't like...
That was the only time you fell?
Just the one time.
That is amazing. I met a guy called Tumbles. He said he fell about 10 times a day. That's why he was called Tumbles.
Yeah, we were just very cautious, very careful. And I don't know. I guess just between having done a little bit of trail running, a lot of backpacking, and even mountain biking, I just felt like, and climbing, I felt comfortable, picking the best route and taking my time and being sure of my footing and really just being comfortable with the weight on my back.
Sure.
Sure. Just the one time. So I was very fortunate.
Were you carrying Ellie the whole time then?
No, I carried Ellie the first little over 800 miles, and then we got.
Oh my gosh!
We got
that's
through
amazing.
the 100-mile. We got through the 100-mile wilderness in Maine, which was about mile 820, 830 for us, and we decided to switch. Derrick I felt more comfortable having him carry Ellie through the rest of Maine and New Hampshire, and then by the time we got out of New Hampshire, she was too big for me to carry. She was too heavy, so he just kept carrying her.
I did wonder, firstly, when I read your blog, that I wonder what the logistics were going to be like for a hike that was going to be so different that it would have been if it was just the two of you. So apart from, of course, Ellie in your backpack, effectively, what were the logistics like, and what was the weight of your combined backpacks then?
In the end, we had done really well about cutting weight back. One thing that was super helpful was sharing as much as we could. Towards the end, it's funny, I like to tell people, if you subtract Ellie's weight, both of us had less than a 10-pound base weight. And that's including, including the things that we had for Ellie. That's including her diapers and including the few clothes items that we had for her. So we were really, really light. We carried Cuban fiber tent. We used a double sleeping pad, a double quilt. And in the end, we were doing no cook. So we were cold soaking our food or just eating stuff that didn't need to be soaked at all. We did a lot of wraps. And so the way that it worked out was that I carried Ellie and our food, and then I accumulated all of our trash between resupplies. And then Bekah carried our tent, our sleep system, our cook system when we had it, and our clothes. So it was nice for her because her pack was a consistent weight throughout the whole time. And mine would, even taking the trash and carrying her diapers out, my pack would still get a little bit lighter between resupplies. But in the end, mine was, depending on how long the resupply was, it was between 40 and 45, sometimes a little bit more. And Bekah's would range between about 16 and 20 pounds.
Wow, dear me. And obviously she Ellie herself put on weight in the hike. So of course she became heavier as the hike went on as well, didn't she?
She did. She gained about 5 pounds from start to finish.
Oh, is that all?
Yeah.
I thought between the age of 12 months and 18 months they grew. That shows how long ago I had kids, obviously. So
well, she started off pretty small anyway.
Yeah.
She started off at 17 pounds and was 22 by the end. So
all right. Well, let's talk about the hike itself now then. And I tried to work out your hike on your blog and I couldn't quite work it out properly. So I know you started at Catawba and I loved home place, by the way. Which direction were you heading and what was the plan to complete your hike?
Yeah, so we started, right at 311, which is the road that leads straight to the home place.
Yep.
And we headed south to Springer. And when we finished at Springer, it was May 13th, and Katahdin wasn't open. So we had a few weeks that we had to wait until the beginning of June before we could drive up to Katahdin and start from there and head back to Catawba. And
so you went back for a couple of weeks, back home?
Right, yeah. So we had a
nice.
3-week break in between finishing at Springer and Katahdin. We thought we were going to take longer between Catawba and Springer, and so we gave ourselves plenty of time, and then we finished. We finished early.
And then you went up to Katahdin. You couldn't go up Katahdin with Ellie, could you?
That's right. So from the park at Baxter State Park, we couldn't take her above tree line, and so we went up Katahdin while Derrick and I did by ourselves, while my mom and my dad, they kept Ellie. They had driven us up there so that we didn't have to figure out car seats and stuff. And so they drove us up there, kept her, and then she was able to go on everything else other than the couple miles up Katahdin.
Wow, that is extraordinary. I'm sure many parents are just shaking their heads thinking about this right now. I am, and I didn't have young kids. So years and years ago, I had young kids. The thought of taking a child on the trail, just amazing. So, how did you arrange your daily routine? Talk us through that.
It kind of depended on where we were and the sunrise and sunset. So when we were up in Maine in June, the sun came up about 4:00 in the morning, and so when the sun was up, Ellie was wide awake. She couldn't sleep through. And so we just kind of altered our schedule to accommodate for her getting up. So when she got up at 4, we started our day at 4 and headed out on the trail within an hour and a half, 2 hours, and just we would hike for an hour and a half to 2 hours at a time, let her get her nap. We would hike as fast as we could. And we would fly past people, and people would think, oh my gosh, they're hiking so fast. But then an hour later, they were passing us, taking an hour-long break every 2 hours. And so we would leapfrog people that we were hiking around all day long in order to get in an average of 15 miles a day. Wow. So, but then, as we got further south, our time changed, and we were no longer starting at 4:00 in the morning, which was a relief. So we were glad to push it back to about 6:00 every morning. So, so we just kept that routine going, and we tried to get to camp by about dark in the evening. But for us, we tried to spend more time in the afternoons, taking breaks along the way instead of having a really long break in the evening, just because it broke up the time more for Ellie during the day. So we didn't usually get into camp until maybe an hour, half an hour before the sun went down.
So basically, you were trying to hike quite fast while she was asleep in the pack, and when she would wake up, you'd stop and almost set up a little mini camp and play with her and feed her and stuff like that. Is that right?
Yeah, we would do that, and then also sometimes we would play games with her in the backpack, so we would stretch some time and get some more miles out of her by playing this game called Find the White Blaze, and so. We'd have her find the next white blaze, and that was one of her first words was blaze.
Oh, how awesome is that?
We were always playing Find the Blaze.
I should have actually mentioned earlier on that your trail names, Derrick, yours is a very fine name, Sherpa, but Bekah and Ellie are Kanga and Roo, which I think is just such a great... They're great trail names. They really are fantastic trail names. So how did you? So you kept her amused by pointing out the white blazes, which is pretty cool, pretty neat idea as well. But when you stopped, what would she just examine her surroundings and try to crawl around in the undergrowth, or what would she do?
Yeah, in the beginning she was crawling and she would play with leaves and pick up acorns and rocks and interact with people if there were people around us. She would eat snacks. And, she's also just learning like normal baby stuff, like how to use a spoon and how to say certain words, and learning like what her nose is and what her eyes are. So a lot of the normal baby stuff, but also some, more exciting things to us as far as being immersed into nature and wilderness.
Yeah.
But like I said earlier, she loved when we would break our trekking poles down to as small as they would go, and she would cruise around wherever we were with those things. She would love that, and she really loved just playing with what things we did have, like our toiletries or our cook set or our phones or whatever. She would just love to pretend. It was so funny to see her just, even if there wasn't food in front of her, grab her spoon and pretend to eat. Like she was just excited that she had learned how to use the spoon.
Isn't that strange? I say kids these days. I sound just like my father, so I apologise to everybody for that. But youngsters don't have the experience you've had. And I think it's going to be really interesting for you to see how she adapts to being back in with her toys and her regular home now. I can't believe she's actually going to get post-trail depression, but you know what I mean? She's going to be doing something so different to what she was doing. And it'd be really interesting. I'm sure you're going to be observing how she behaves in the next couple of months.
Well, I will say that this morning, as soon as we finished breakfast, she noticed her backpack in the corner, and she said, "Backpack," and we put her down, and she ran over and climbed into it, and basically forced me to take her on a walk this morning. So.
Oh, that's awesome. That is really awesome. Now, I wonder, I know you wanted to do this, and you're backpackers, and it was always your dream to do the AT. Did you ever... Do you think having her enhanced your hike, or did you sometimes wish it was just the two of you?
That's a tough question to answer. I don't know. What do you think?
I would definitely say in the moment that there were times where having Ellie with us made it more challenging mentally, because there was not a lot of time for us to take a physical or mental break, because we would, we were hiking and working really hard physically, and then we would stop to give her a break. And, that's kind of when we want to stop and relax and just sit. Well, especially when she started walking, we were chasing her. One of us was up with her during every break. So there really was never a break, and that got really taxing on us. And so I think, there were a lot of days where we just wanted to sit and rest, and we would watch other through hikers literally just like read a book and sit and eat their snack in quiet. And we kind of got envious of times like that. But that was few and far between when we felt like that. For the most part, having her with us enhanced the experience so much, watching her explore and discover new things for the first time and having those memories with her. A lot of people tell us, "Oh, it's too bad that she won't be able to remember this." And, I know she won't remember it. She'll see pictures and have stories, but we'll remember it. And the memories that we have with her are just phenomenal.
One thing that really helped us when things were hard, when she was fussy or, cutting teeth and just not having a good day, or, not allowing us to rest or take a break, it always helped to just remind ourselves that she'd be doing this at home too. So we could be either out here on the trail, living our dreams, having a good time, and going through these normal things of being parents, or we could be at home still doing these normal things of being parents. So it really helped to keep that in mind, put that into perspective for us. And it definitely, I think, prevented any thoughts of not wanting her there or thinking it would be better without her, because we're not without her regardless. She's our daughter, she's with us, and this is life. So just how it is.
I think it's been an absolute, it will prove to be an absolute blessing to you. I'm sure you've got loads of pictures, you've got your blog. I know you're still updating that, but you've got a record of this, and she will see it, and it's going to be a joyous thing for her to read when she's older, isn't it? I think how fantastic that must be that you took the time out, and took her on a journey like that, and she shared it with you. I thought it all the time, even though I was nervous on her behalf, but and probably on your behalf as well. The fact that you've actually done it is such a fantastic achievement to have done, and the fact that she's experienced it with you, even though she won't remember it, she'll see all the pictures, she'll know she was there, and I think that's a great thing.
Yeah, and one thing I'm really glad about her not remembering it is that maybe she'll want to do it again and we'll get to do it again, or I'll get to or maybe not necessarily the AT, but maybe she'll get the long distance bug and we'll get to go, do some other long trails that we've talked and thought about doing. So that'd be cool.
So what was your favorite part of the trail then? Because there are I found the trail was so different in virtually every different state had different things about it. What was your favorite part?
You're right, it was, but we had never been to New England before, and so especially Maine and New Hampshire, we were just in awe of the trail, and that also happens to be where Ellie learned to walk, which is like the big monumental part of a baby's life. And so between her meeting these awesome milestones and in combination with the incredible scenery of Maine and New Hampshire, that just made for a really awesome combo. And it might have been the hardest part of the trail, but there's so much growth that comes from doing really hard things that in hindsight, it was worth it.
I know that when we spoke before, you talked about after you'd been on Katahdin. I know you had some tricky times after Katahdin in Maine. So tell us about those tougher times.
Yeah, we definitely have respect for people who start at Katahdin and do a full Sobo from there.
Yes.
Maine was gnarly. It was hard. We had a lot of rain. The mosquitoes were indescribable. We would, even if we stopped for 30 minutes, we would put our tent up just to get into the tent and get away from the mosquitoes. And obviously the terrain is hard, but the terrain combined with the bugs, combined with the rain, it just definitely took a toll on us mentally, physically, emotionally. And Maine was really the only place that we ever even discussed skipping. We were there and it was just like, not that we were scared for Ellie at all, but it was just hard for us. And we were like, do we want to be doing this? And what it boiled down to, we just took it from town to town. So I think at the time we were trying to make our way to Caratunk, and we said, okay, let's just get to Caratunk and then get to the next town. And so from there throughout the rest of Maine, we would just do our best to get to the next town. And, when we were there in Caratunk looking forward to, I guess it was probably Stratton, we're like, okay, we see everything between here and Stratton. We can do this. And so we would get to the next town. And then from Stratton, we would look forward to Rangeley, and we were like, oh, 3 days, it's 3 days. We can get to Rangeley. And then we would get to Rangeley, and we just did that throughout the rest of Maine until before you know it, we were out of Maine. And it was so rewarding and such a huge sense of accomplishment to hit Gorham. It was awesome.
It is an accomplishment, but it is very, very tough. But I think it was the most beautiful state of all. I just thought Maine was an extraordinary place to have been. We were lucky. We had fantastic weather in Maine, so that was
You're very
better.
lucky.
Very lucky.
So I understand. Yeah, and we recently had another couple who hiked this year on the show, and I've often wondered what it must be like to hike with a spouse. How did the two of you come out of this trip? Having done this together, how was your relationship on the trip, or was it all about Ellie?
Well, I know, Derrick, earlier when you were asking about our experience in our past, he kept using we, not just, I had experience. And that's because we have literally followed each other to every job in the outdoor field that we've had. And so we have worked together in the field a lot, and we spent a whole semester in college in the field together in the same group. And so we have a lot of experience working together in the field. And I think that was really beneficial to already know how to work together in those kind of situations. And then adding Ellie was really all we had to focus on instead of having to work on things between us. And so, I mean, there's definitely parts of the trail where we had to walk separate because it was just like, okay, we just need a breather and we just need some time to ourselves. And so, we would walk separate for that day until we caught up to each other for a break. But overall, it felt natural to be together, and we're just stronger after it.
Yeah. Would you ever like to do it, just the two of you? When Ellie's older, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, the idea is definitely an exciting one to consider. There's just so many other adventures that we want to do. I would do the AT again, but the AT provided so many opportunities to talk about other things that we want to do. That there's a really, really long list of other trips that we want to do. So would I do it again? Absolutely. Would I do it with Bekah? Absolutely. We would love to do that.
You'd like to do it with Ellie again, wouldn't you?
I would love to do it with Ellie. I would just not like to carry her again.
I could totally understand. And did either of you learn anything about the other that surprised you on this trip?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think we both knew each other pretty well and knew how we behaved in a wilderness setting, and
the reason I ask is I think something like the AT or any long distance trail, I'm sure, exposes you and makes you vulnerable and makes you find out about yourself. Certainly on a trail, I just wonder if you'd find out something about each other. But if you were aware of each other so closely already, then perhaps you didn't. But I know in my personal case, I found out a lot about myself, so I presumed you would find out something about each other. So perhaps not, though. You know, different people experience this trail in so many different ways that I'm sure we all have a different response to that question.
Yeah, and that's one thing that is really cool about the trail is that, you know, we all experience it differently and all get something different out of it.
Yeah. So now you're back. Are you going to be completing your blog? Because I found it quite confusing, so I didn't know which direction you were going to start with when I was trying to work it out. And I thought, where are they going now? You know.
Yeah, so we thought when we first started the blog before we left, we thought we would have all this time in the evenings and in town to update the blog, and that just did not happen at all. So yes, but now that we're back and we're getting settled, the plan is to finish the blog through our finish at McAfee Knob, and then as well as extend it onto kind of not necessarily a how-to, but more informational as far as other families that are interested in taking little ones out, whether that be for a weekend or longer. And so we want to go over topics like diapers in the field, clothing layers in the field, what they eat. And so we really want to, there's tons of different through hikers that have that for adults. And so I don't really know of anyone that has one for young kids or toddlers at that. So I'm looking forward to starting that.
No, I hope that what you've done does encourage other people to consider it. I mean, I would still say and I think when we spoke before, you said the frame was so well constructed that she was pretty safe in her position in the backpack, wasn't she? So if you did fall, she was pretty well protected, wasn't she?
Oh, very much so. Yes, we used a Deuter pack, and it was phenomenal for the entire trip. Right.
Now, I suppose the $1 million question would be: would you ever recommend others to do this as well, on balance?
It's a difficult question to answer, because in one hand we're like, yes, it's an awesome experience. We would love for other families to get to experience this, but then at the same time we want to be really intentional about making sure that people are prepared and have the experience that's necessary to do something like this. It's one thing for a single individual to go out there by themselves and to whatever, it's just me, like I have anybody else to worry about. So we are hesitant to say just go do it, because we want people to be prepared and we want people to get experience and know how to backpack and know how to get along in the backcountry before you add a baby into the mix. Because that definitely can change a lot of things. So, yes, we definitely encourage people to get out and do something, whether it's taking your baby on a hike for the first time or even car camping, whatever it is. We encourage people to get out and do something and then build from there. You can go from your car camping trip to a walk-in campsite to maybe an overnight just 2 miles into a shelter or, just something. Work your way into it, get experience, and get as much experience as you can on your own before adding the baby into the mix.
And another thing that we did prior to leaving for the trail was we both went and had our wilderness first responder certifications, we went and had that we were recertified just so that all of that wilderness backcountry medicine knowledge was fresh on our minds, so that we had the peace of mind that if anything were to come up, that we were adequately prepared for that.
Well, listening to you speak, I'm really glad we spoke, because we spoke more extensively today than we did the other day. And I hadn't realized quite how experienced you were. And I think looking at that, with your experience, even that last thing you said about the training you took, it's something that people really need to think about. This is not a trail to take a child out if you really don't know what you're doing. But if you know what you're doing, I love the idea that this is such an accessible trail, and to make it accessible with a now an 18-month-old child, I think is wonderful. And I think you've done a fantastic achievement. I really take my hat off to you. I really do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We definitely appreciate the support, and we've really appreciated the support from the trail community throughout our adventure.
That's lovely. That's lovely to hear. That's really nice to hear.
Yeah, it's been
great.
Look,
thank you so much for doing this with me, and I really appreciate it. And I would love to have interviewed Ellie, but I understand she's now sleeping.
She is.
She's moving, yeah. Thank you for reaching out to us. We've enjoyed talking with you.
No, at all. Lovely to talk to you, and hopefully we'll speak again soon sometime.
Yeah, I hope so.
Sounds great, Steve. Thank you.
Cheers then. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Now, isn't that something? By the way, you'll notice that I messed up their finishing dates right at the beginning of the interview. I didn't tell them, but I had my notes on somebody else in front of me at the time. I think I recovered pretty well. At the end, both Derrick and Bekah were eager for others to take their young children on the trail, with the very real caveats that you need to be experienced to do this. I was also struck how Ellie was now returning to toys for the first time in 6 months. That's quite a transition. What a lovely story. We've had a couple of new 5-star reviews on iTunes this week. In fact, we're up to 76 reviews in all of which are 5-star. Please don't take that as a challenge, by the way. SDL, which I guess is St. Louis, Kathy Roz, tells me that I'm a regular companion at work. She loves the trail magic stories. Yep, trail magic is really something to behold, Kathy. What I really like about this review is that Kathy says that this podcast has inspired me to attempt the Katy Trail in segments, which is a 250-mile trail in Missouri. Isn't that great? Scooter, or Jared, tells me that he's hiking the Ice Age Trail in Wisconsin for the 4th time. Clearly, having listened to several episodes, he says, you should come up to Wisconsin for a hike on the Ice Age Trail and join Jessa for a few miles. Yeah, that's really going to work well, Scooter. Jessa and her fiancé Nick do about 30 miles a day. Well, I'll be lucky to knock off 10 on a good day. Thanks for the offer, though. Now, I'm actually going to play you a recording of another review, which I read out in episode number 8. One last one. RTK, or Bruce, says, with the heading bloody good, by the way, the best podcast for covering things AT and long-distance hiking. Cheers, Bruce. That's encouraging to hear. He goes on to say that he wants me to persevere with the show at least until he starts his through hike in February next year. I'll try my best. Now, that review was from Bruce Matson, and it started a conversation that has continued to this day. Bruce is going to be next year's Jessa. He has such a different story to tell, though, that we've decided to start an entirely separate podcast in which to tell it. It's going to be called Returning to Katahdin, an Appalachian Trail Dream. And the first episode will be in iTunes and other places from the morning of Monday, November the 6th. I'll be bringing Bruce onto the show next week for a brief introduction and to set the stage. We're going to tell his story in some detail and want you all to follow along. I mentioned iTunes there, but wanted to let you all know that the podcast can now also be found in a bunch of new places, including my YouTube page and Google Play Music. I'll be adding iHeartRadio in the coming weeks as well. And if I could work out how to do it, I'm going to put some links in the show notes. I think sometimes these things get reviewed for a couple of days, so they may not be there yet, but they're all going to be there soon. Now, with DocSpot, Lynn has the very pleasant task of talking about wilderness-acquired diarrhea. Take it away, Lynn. Now, we're back with Lynn, and I made sure I recorded this after I've eaten tonight, and you're about to learn why. Hi, Lynn, how are you?
I'm doing well. Nice to be back.
And nice to have you back on the show as well. Now, this is about intestinal problems, also known as wilderness-acquired diarrhea, or to put it give it another name, backcountry diarrhea. And reading through it, there aren't very many pleasant sentences in this. So let's just go for it and talk about it and what's the best way to avoid it and how it comes about.
Okay. So believe it or not, this is what the Wilderness Medical Society calls a variety of traveler's diarrhea. And if you think about it, that's what you're doing. You're traveling, you're in the backcountry, and you happen to get diarrhea. To put it in context, during any 4-week period in the United States, about 7% of people will have symptoms of diarrhea, but about 50% of long-distance hikers on the AT during a 4-week period have experienced at least one episode of...
That is extraordinary. That is an amazing number. Oh my gosh.
It really is. And I honestly think it's because we don't pay as much attention to our basic hygiene of hand washing and washing utensils and taking care of our food as we're eating it. And also clearly the water.
Hang on, why you mention that, I understand that, and you're right. I refer to this as feral living in the past. I wonder whether section hikers, because of the relative shortness of their time on the trail, or day hikers, don't suffer this because they pay more attention to it and they haven't slipped into that different lifestyle, I guess.
I think with the day hikers, it's very rare. They're probably about the same as the regular U.S. population because they'll bring in their own water, they'll pack their own food at home. Generally, they're eating 1, maybe 2 meals where they need to wash their hands. But with section hikers, and especially with long-distance hikers, you definitely run that increased risk because you're trying to obtain water that you need to purify. You're not paying as much attention because you don't have the use of running water and soap, so you're not paying as much attention to washing your hands. And this wilderness-acquired diarrhea actually takes about 7 days from the time that you're actually exposed to the bacteria or the virus before you actually get symptoms. So oftentimes these section hikers will not develop the diarrhea until they're already home. And I've actually had people who have come into my office that said, "Oh yeah, I was out on the trail, over the weekend or something," and they're in my office on a Thursday and they're complaining about it. So this really, that does happen. So yeah, a lot of it has to do with really paying a little bit more attention to the hygiene and where you're getting your water and your food from.
What's the way forward then? Because 50% is a large number. It makes it almost impossible to ignore on a 6-month hike, I guess. So what would you suggest?
You're almost destined to get it. So the most important thing, again, wash your hands. Try to use soap and water. That's better than just purely the alcohol rubs like Purell or alcohol wipe. Washing with warm soapy water if you can, and then dry on a towel. Because believe it or not, the friction of actual drying on the towel helps further to remove the bacteria.
So I can tell you what most people do after they've used the privy. And once again, I apologise to anybody who happens to be eating while they're listening to this. But anybody who uses the privy will tend to come out and spray some of that Purell or something like that on the hands and think they're done. And what's the effectiveness of that or lack of effectiveness of it?
It is effective. It's better than nothing.
Okay.
It's easier to use. So honestly, if you're going to do that as opposed to doing nothing, definitely do the alcohol wipes or alcohol rubs. If you have the luxury of using soap and water, or I think I mentioned in the first aid kit, Castile soap wipes.
Yes.
If you can take a bunch of those, use one of those rather than Purell, that will actually be better for you. But it is hard to find good, soap and water and a dry towel every time you use the privy.
It really is, yeah. So in practical terms, I'm kind of wondering, there are a number of different ways of getting it, aren't they? You can get it through the water, you can get it through, obviously, cleaning yourself after you've used the privy. I suppose the best way you can look after yourself is the water treatment. That's the best. At least there are things out there to help your water. How do you recommend people do that?
Okay, so there's 4 basic ways of water treatment. boiling, filtering, chemical disinfectant that's using either bleach or iodine, and the portable UV light devices that they have. Boiling is the most effective. However, like hand washing, it's time consuming and you have to stop and you have to, get out your jet boil or some other type of device. And a lot of times people will go stoveless, so they can't boil. But important that if you are going to boil, especially if you're in camp and you're setting up and you're staying around for an hour or two or even overnight, boil the water. You boil it for 1 minute at a rolling boil and let it cool on its own and then drink up. It's really not very difficult as long as you do have the stove and you have the time to do it. Interestingly, if you're at high altitude, you have to boil for a longer time because water boils at a lower temperature above 6,000 feet. Filtering, like the Purell, that's the most often used because it's the easiest, it's the quickest. They have the Catadine filters and the Sawyer filters that are now built into the Nalgene bottles. So you just fill up your Nalgene, you screw the top on, and you drink through a filter.
Wow, I haven't seen those.
Oh, yeah,
nice,
There's some wonderful products out there that make drinking water much more accessible for the long-distance hiker. So I'm really thrilled about that because you don't have to sit there and wait for the water to boil.
Yeah.
So again, if it's easier to use, you're going to use it. It may not be quite as effective as something that's more labor-intensive, but it'll be better than nothing, and it may help reduce your risk of wilderness-acquired diarrhea.
Okay.
Iodine and bleach work well, but the taste can be off-putting, and it does take time. Just like boiling, you have to actually put the iodine or the bleach in the bottle of water, and you have to let it sit for 30 minutes.
Uh-huh.
So that's something that can be an issue. Another thing that's really cool is these little UV light sticks, portable UV devices that you can put in a liter of water and you stir it around for about 90 seconds and it purifies the water. But
does that work as well as filtration?
It does work. It does work very well. And the only problem with that is that you have to have clear water. So if it's got cloudy or turbid water, the UV light can't penetrate. So you might have to filter it through, a coffee filter or a bandana or something like that to get out a lot of the sediment. So that's an issue, but that is very, very effective. So those are the 4 ways of treating water.
But the thing to do, I guess, is the best way to avoid contaminated water is to make sure you get it from a stream that's running as opposed to one or two of the puddles that I drew my water from a few times.
Oh, yes.
And away from heavy animal use, I guess, don't you?
Right. So the water to avoid, if you possibly can, is water that's been near any type of heavy human or animal use, or clearly cloudy, foamy, suspicious-looking water you want to try to avoid. It's best to get water from either a spring source, a fast-flowing stream, and this is interesting, streams that run perpendicular to the trail would be better than a stream that's running along the trail.
Why is that?
Because you're less likely, if you think about it, the water is less likely to be contaminated by human or animal traffic. And if you think about a stream that's crossing the trail, if you want to go upstream to get your water as opposed to downstream from the trail, that's, again, less likely to be contaminated with human activity. Of course, freshly melted snow is great. Rainwater can be a little tricky. If it's caught fresh from the sky, that's great. But sometimes if it's a very heavy rain, it can actually stir up sediment that's in a pond or something like that and actually worsen the contaminants that are in the pond already.
I must say, I found the water that I got on the trail out of streams to be so tasty. And most people who go on the trail for the first time are always struck by how beautiful the water tastes, coming out of a mountain. And I was always aware of the need to filter, but I can tell you, a lot of people I met didn't filter at all, ever. I mean, really, ever.
Yes,
which is amazing to me.
I have heard that, and great if you can do that. That's and get away with it. Wonderful, but in my opinion, why risk it? Because it's so easy to filter or to use the UV stick. And you really want to be able to enjoy the trip. You don't want to be bogged down in developing diarrhea that could lead to severe dehydration.
Yes.
You could wind up
That's
getting
an important
fevers.
factor. I know that is an important, and I know a couple of people who did have bad, I think giardia or one of the things, and they got massively dehydrated very, very quickly.
Yeah, that could end your trip. You at worst, or at best, you might need to get off the trail and get some treatment for a couple of days.
Yeah.
And so, again, an ounce of prevention. Wash your hands, filter your water, and you should be all right.
Okay, lovely. Well, thanks for that, Lynn. So I'm glad I've eaten, and I'm sure people will have. I'm sure people are aware of the need to do this. But as you know, it's tough to stay too clean on the trail. But it's something you obviously want to avoid as much as possible. And by taking a few steps, perhaps that'll increase your chances a bit.
Exactly. I think if you get into a routine of things, it just makes it a little bit easier. And then you could avoid some serious illness.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll see you next week. Thanks for that. And we'll catch up with you next week again. All right?
Terrific.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
50% of thru hikers get a bout of that. Can you imagine? By the way, if you thought I was being a little childish about diarrhea there, I could not agree with you more. Don't you love it how doctors can rise above such silliness and remain entirely clinical? Thanks for that, Lynn. Very important stuff to know. I had a bunch of entries for my giveaway of Jeff Holt's book. The winner came from a lovely email, part of which I'm going to read out because I love what it stands for. And this is directly from the email. As for my favourite spot on the trail for the contest on Jeff Holt's book, I'm not sure I qualify for your contest because I was never on the AT. My favourite spot would be the arch across the trail at the beginning of the approach trail at Amicalola Falls. And the reason it would be my favourite is because my wife and I plan to hike the Appalachian Trail next year, and walking under that arch will be one of the biggest achievements of my life. The rest of the AT would not be possible without the decision to walk under that arch. I know that the AT is very tough, although I know I have no idea how hard it actually is, but actually deciding to hike the trail is a very big decision to me and almost looks bigger than actually hiking it. I keep coming up with all sorts of reasons, and he put excuses in brackets, why I shouldn't do it. I have a comfortable life and job, albeit boring and mundane. So to defy logic and throw my life away and go hiking for 6 months is very huge to me, but I want to learn everything the trail has to teach me. Thanks for being instrumental in helping me to decide to hike the Appalachian Trail. Keep up the good work on the podcast, and I love this bit, and I hope to be listening to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail podcast as we stagger from Georgia to Maine. Isn't that lovely? He may not have been on the trail, but he clearly has that spot in his mind, and it has real meaning for him. And he's absolutely right. You have to make the decision to do it. And passing underneath that arch means you're on your way. This was from Lance Hostetler. So Lance, email me your address and I'll send you Jeff's book. Next week, we're going to have another Jeff, Jeffrey Gray, or Loner. He was not called Loner for no reason, and he leads a somewhat unconventional lifestyle. I really like Jeffrey, and I think you're going to enjoy our little chat. Finally, we're almost at the end of my journey. This is chapter 26 out of 28, and we're into the 100-mile wilderness, though our little team did it in a very different way than most. I have a bit of a discussion with myself, and then find that being back in the woods, with no access to a town, a pub, or a restaurant, is exactly what my soul has been searching for. See you next week. Chapter 26, Monson and Slackpacking. The 100-mile wilderness was neither precisely 100 miles, nor was it actually a wilderness. However, this last stretch, taking us to within spitting distance of Mount Katahdin, had been on my mind for several days, and was also the place that I believed I'd be most tested. We had been successfully slackpacking for a few weeks, resupplying regularly, but now we knew that full packs would be needed. We would also have to carry Herculean amounts of food for this 100-mile stint. At least that's what we'd been told. Shaw's Hiker Hostel was perfectly situated. It was not only a comfortable stop prior to tackling the wilderness, but was also a wonderful meeting place for those of us on the verge of a fantastic achievement. There was a noticeable buzz about the place when we pitched up. I was lucky enough to snag a room with 2 beds, though the second bed remained unoccupied throughout my stay, giving me my preferred privacy. The spare bed became a repository for all my junk. Everything about Shores was done with the hiker in mind. There was Wi-Fi, washing facilities for both clothes and bodies, decent beds and clean sheets. Add to this a blowout breakfast and you can see why Shores checked all the boxes. We needed to leave earlier than most each morning, so our team stuck with Pete's Place for breakfast. Our excellent decision rewarded us with more than enough calories for our day. The fact that there was also a great pub a short walk away from Shores made it the perfect storm for our last shot at civilization before the end of our hike. T-Bird was still our booking agent for slackpacking. She had heard from a couple of female through hikers, Smasher and Spirit, that there was a man in town named Buddy who was a shuttle driver. Buddy could be persuaded, for a fee, to slackpack us for about 45 miles of the 100-mile wilderness. This would take care of the main mountains and get us well on our way to Katahdin. In the end, it was Trillium who did the deal with Buddy. Once it was done, we were able to look forward to the next few evenings in Monson. The first day, Sunday, Buddy drove us out to Long Pond Stream. In trail miles, it was just over 14 miles north of Monson. As luck would have it, this meant that we had an immediate ford to negotiate, Little Wilson Stream. Inevitably, I was the only one who didn't quite make it across, managing to dunk my boot into the stream with the resulting squelch keeping me company for the rest of the day. Once that incident had passed, we had a fairly uneventful hike, with the expected rain not materialising as strongly as the forecast had indicated. We got back to Main 15 and Shores with only minimal drying out required. About 100 yards before we reached the road, as we came out of the forest, we came across a sign for Nobos that made us smile. Appalachian Trail. Caution! There are no places to obtain supplies or get help until Able Bridge, 100 miles north. Do not attempt this section unless you have a minimum of 10 days' supplies and are fully equipped. This is the longest wilderness section of the entire AT, and its difficulty should not be underestimated. Good hiking, MATC. I particularly warmed to the gloom and doom warning, followed by the rather jolly note of encouragement, emphasised by an exclamation point. Once dry, we headed down to the local pub, forming an ever larger table with about 10 other excited hikers joining us to share experiences. We were all aware that the end was so close, and on this evening it hit me harder than I led on to my team. Back in my room, I allowed myself the luxury of imagining that I was at home once more. I thought about the changes that I knew had taken place since I had stepped out of my marriage almost exactly 6 months previously. Diane had been caring for her folks more and more, and I knew that she had now set an expectation of her presence on their part. She would leave home about 6:30 in the morning, then return 3 hours later. At any time between 2:30 and 3:30 p.m, she would go back to them. Finally, she would get back to our home by about 6:30 or 7 p.m. I knew this to be the case because she had often recounted these hours to me. I could only see my return through the prism of those hours. While I wasn't sure how this would work out, it was clear to me that I would be stepping back into the marriage, though only part of the way back. I would be spending plenty of time alone and would have to find things to do on my own. Before you think that this is perhaps the way most marriages should be run, and I have friends who mention that to me, imagine what this actually means. Diane would, by and large, be unavailable for many, if any, otherwise shared experiences during the day and many evenings. I knew I'd be making my own schedule as if still single. Given my past proclivities, this was a state of affairs I felt would be healthier to avoid. I knew that it was inevitable that we'd be spending less time as a couple. That bothered me. Mind you, I also knew that Diane's presence in her folks' lives had become central to their day. They had survived, prospered even, because of her devotion. If I had tried to pressure her to leave some time for the two of us, I think it would have laid the groundwork for a resentment that would be insoluble should her parents' health deteriorate as a result. That night, while I lay there in the dark, with the occasional thud and muffled laughter coming from one part of the house or another, with my hopes soon to be fulfilled on the trail, I knew that I'd be returning to a less than complete marriage. Such a reflection led me to weigh these competing emotions, ultimately settling upon a decision regarding my marriage that, in previous years, I would have been unlikely to make. I have already mentioned my less than strict adherence to my marriage vows in the past, so my record was spotty in this regard, to say the least. However, my marriage to Diane had been so unexpected, so wonderful, and her impact upon me so beneficial, that the vows that we had made to one another in the Turks and Caicos Islands 7 years before now came home to me in the framework of this new reality. Despite an unknown future, despite a need for her company and her attention, I decided that night that I would not only keep those vows, but I would also try to live my life as fully as possible and wait for her to rejoin me in our marriage. I may have been the one who walked away into the woods, but she had also helped upend the marriage by her understandable commitment to her parents. I've learned over the years that no condition is permanent. I also knew that, eventually, we would be a couple again. I could wait. I had the patience, but I'm glad I went through another conversation in my head that, like the many others before it on the trail, I really needed to have before I finally got home. Thus resolved, I allowed myself to drop off to sleep. Having done the first 15 or so miles of the wilderness, Buddy returned to the same spot the following morning. He pointed us north this time, giving us a slightly longer hike that would end at Katahdin Ironworks Road. It was a great day, spoiled by one daft slip on my part. Rain had continued through the night, but the forecast told us, correctly, that it was expected to blow through after about 9 a.m. The rain gave way to bright sunshine with a breeze that kept us cool. The guide promised plenty of ups and downs with lots of opportunities to keep warm as we pushed uphill. I've heard these ups and downs referred to as PUDs, pointless ups and downs, though they never seemed pointless to me. The elevation changes were tough throughout the entire trail, but it would have been boring as hell without them. I cursed as much as anybody when I could see the descending path rising ahead. That said, I wouldn't have changed a single one of them. With the rain replaced by an intermittently clear blue sky, it was a terrific day for views. The spectacular lakes or ponds continued to draw the eye, with the view from barren ledges on Barren Mountain being one that burned itself on my retina forever. Maine and New Hampshire, more than any other states, proved the inadequacy of cameras on the AT. So I always tried to store these great days in my brain, pulling them out from time to time to revisit them. The colours may have faded, but they still look far better than they do on a 6-inch by 4-inch photograph. We had also experienced a few cold nights, with the impact upon the foliage startling. Back at these slightly higher elevations, we were able to see what looked like a warm-up for Monet, as he dabbed orange, yellow and even pink paint on the green canvas below. We first noticed this crossing Third Mountain, as the valley opened up in front of us. The rest of the day saw the old boy get into his stride, with explosions of colour all around as we passed through. This day turned out to be excellent preparation for our legs, as, with Katahdin coming up, any extra help in the leg department was going to be welcome. We were all as strong as oxen by this time, but Katahdin looked like Mount Doom in the guide. It loomed over us as we drew closer. I think I now know how Frodo must have felt. I had just been speaking with another thru-hiker, my team having hiked on, when I turned to hurry after them. I slipped on a large, wet tree trunk that was across my path. I flipped in the air for the 45th and what turned out to be most dramatic fall of the trip. As I came down in that slow-motion way that we sometimes experience, I was aware of a rock to my left. I quickly flinched at a potential collision between skull and rock. Luckily, my head missed the rock, but I ended up wedged, literally, between a rock and a hard place. In this case, the log. It was excruciatingly painful, but my first thought was that my phone had been in my back pocket. Helpless, I had to be pulled from my trap, slowly getting back to my feet. There was a considerable amount of blood coming from both arms, though I was relieved that nothing had been broken. My diagnosis turned out to be slightly premature, as I discovered on pulling my phone from my pocket. The impact had shattered the glass and bent the frame of the phone. Astonishingly, it continued to operate as both a phone and a camera until the end. With less than 100 miles to go, it seemed appropriate that my phone should take some share of my battering. In what had been something of a hallmark of the trip, I had no real alternative other than to carry on, so I did just that. I winced from time to time, but was relieved that not only was I not dead, but I was also able to walk and make a phone call. Seeing positives and negatives was another benefit from this hike. I defy anybody who has hiked the Appalachian Trail not to have discovered this skill. Buddy had judged our woefully slow walking pace perfectly. He was there to meet us as we emerged, tired from going over 5 mountains, but elated to have wiped out another 15 miles of the wilderness. The ride back to Monson was an hour this time, with another trip to the pub as our reward. Back at Katahdin Ironworks Road the following morning, with my left leg aching sporadically, we had planned another 15-miler that took us over White Cap, the last high mountain before Katahdin. It was to be our second from last day's slack packing, and we appreciated our lighter packs once more. While White Cap was the highest we had climbed since the Bigelows, we were crossing a ridge of peaks all day long. We emerged at West Branch Ponds Road, a full 2-hour drive back to Monson, including an 18-mile bumpity-bump along a dirt road used by logging trucks. I'm not the finest of travellers at the best of times, so this drive had me feeling a little under the weather by the time we arrived in Monson. Of course, I wasn't so under the weather as to avoid my last calorific overdose. That night, our last in Monson, I met up again with Sherpa. I had originally bumped into him just before the Smokies and had only seen him once since then. 2 of the fearless young women, Bluebird and Simba, were also there. They both hugged me excitedly as I did them. Simba seemed shocked by my reduced physique and wasn't afraid to tell me how awful I looked. Bless her. For my part, I was delighted to see that virtually all the young women I had met on this trail had made it to here and beyond. I'd seen entries in the shelter logs that confirmed that Tigger, Styles, Hawkeye and Twist had passed through. Of course, I had worried about Stardust as well. Now that Simba and Bluebird were nearing the end, I felt a kind of paternal relief. They must have really made their folks proud. There was also a mother and daughter combination at Monson, Bad Camel and Popeye. They had started the hike as a family, with Bad Camel's husband accompanying them. Unfortunately, he had injured himself and needed to quit the trail. Somewhat uncharitably, he suggested that they wouldn't survive without him. If there is anything that today's woman will respond to, it is today's man telling her that she can't survive without him. Popeye, the daughter, had a glint in her eye as she told this story over dinner that night. Few people had a better motive for getting their picture taken at the top of Mount Katahdin than these 2 wonderful women. My guess is that they will be sharing their story for many years to come. Silly man, Mr. Camel. We were now almost out of slack-packing opportunities, though one more remained. Our uncomfortable drive of the previous evening was retraced before Buddy waved us off. He was staying in the area for a bit of fishing before meeting us later at Joe Mary Road. We would be at mile 2130, where he would then hand over the remainder of our packs. It turned out to be an easy day's hiking, with a gorgeous Crawford Pond an exquisitely tranquil highlight. We could see more of the developing colours as we looked across the lake to the gentler hills ahead. Leaving Buddy and our link to Monson behind, we assumed our full packs once more. As the light was beginning to fade, we headed a mile or so into the woods. The sun had almost gone when I saw an opening just off the path. I found a spot for a couple of tents for me and Lydnot, while the women moved deeper into the forest to set up about 30 yards from us. As before, it was great to be back in the woods. I sat on a log preparing my pasta, with only the twittering nuthatches as company. It was very calming, and I felt at home again.